At some point today, someone is going to get under your skin, and there's an 85% chance you won't say anything. You'll go quiet, change the subject, maybe vent to someone who isn't them. Tell yourself it's not worth it. A 2026 national survey found that 85% of Americans avoided at least one difficult conversation last month because it might lead to conflict, not because the thing didn't matter, because confrontation, even when you're right, feels like a risk most people aren't willing to take. And here's what's strange about that. For 99% of human history, that option didn't exist. You couldn't go quiet and wait for it to pass. You couldn't ghost someone. You couldn't find a new group, a new job, a new city. The person who just got under your skin was the same person you would wake up next to, hump aside, and depend on for the rest of your life. So what did they actually do? Because these weren't people stumbling through life without a plan. They survived ice ages. They crossed continents on foot. They built the social foundations that every civilization you've ever heard was eventually built on top of. And they did all of that while living in close contact with the same 50 people, through every argument, every betrayal, every broken trust, without a single court, law, prison, or authority figure to call. What they figured out is more sophisticated than most people expect. And when you see it, you'll understand something about conflict that most people spend their whole life avoiding. If any of that felt uncomfortably familiar, you're in the right place. This channel is about the things you do every day and never stop to question. The way you think, the way you react, the patterns running underneath both, that you don't usually notice. Until you do, before we get into what they did, you need to feel what their world was actually like. Because it's easy to hear ancient humans and picture something vague and distant. But this wasn't that long ago. For roughly 95% of the time our species has existed, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years, every human being on Earth lived in a small band, 20 to 50 people moving together. That's it. Not a village, not a tribe of thousands. 20 to 50 people who knew everything about each other. And I mean everything. How you behaved when you were hungry, whether you could be trusted when things got hard. That thing you did 3 winters ago that people still hadn't forgotten. There was no privacy in the way we think of it. You slept close together. You ate together. You moved together. Everything you did was visible to the people around you almost all the time. And here's the part that really matters. You could not leave. Not really. Surviving alone in the ancient world wasn't difficult. It was essentially impossible. You needed people to hunt large animals. You needed people to watch your children. You needed people to protect you when you were sick or injured. Alone, you were dead within weeks. So the group wasn't just community. It wasn't just company. It was a thing keeping you alive, which means the person you were in conflict with, the one who took too much, said the wrong thing, crossed a line. You needed them. Even when you hated them, you needed them. That one fact changes everything about how conflict had to work. So when conflict happened in these groups, and it did constantly, because humans are humans, what was the first thing that happened? Not fighting, not a formal process, not a leader stepping in to decide who was right. Gossip. Now I know that sounds almost too simple, but stay with me, because this is where it gets interesting. Robin Dunbar is an anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist at Oxford University. He spent decades studying how primates and humans build and maintain social bonds. And what he found is that gossip, talking about other people, sharing social information, is not a flaw in human communication. It's the point of it. He estimates that somewhere between 60 and 65% of all human conversation, even today, even in professional settings, is social information. Who did what, who can be trusted, who behaved badly and how. In other primates, social bonding happens through grooming, physical touch, one-on-one, slow. Humans replaced that with language. And the specific kind of language that did the most work was information about other people's behavior. Because in a group of 50, if someone acts selfishly, if they take more than their share, if they lie, if they bully, if they freeload, that information needs to move fast. And it did before the person even realized the group had noticed. The group had already talked. Everyone already knew. And once everyone knows, the pressure begins. Now here's what makes this genuinely remarkable. Anthropologist Christopher Bohm spent decades studying hunter-gatherer societies across the world, different continents, different languages, different cultures, thousands of miles apart. And he found that when a group member started disrupting things, hoarding, dominating, lying, bullying, the response followed almost exactly the same pattern. Every time. Stage 1, ridicule. Not cruel, surgical. A joke that lands a little too accurately. Public laughter that has just a little too much edge to it. Light enough to deny. Clear enough that the person knows. And the group knows. And everyone knows that everyone knows. Bohm documented this across dozens of societies. But one example stood out to me. The Kung San people of southern Africa, one of the most studied foraging groups in the world, had a practice called insulting the meat. When a hunter came back with a kill, a real kill, something significant, the group would mock it. That's all you got? This is barely enough for anyone. I've seen better from younger hunters. The hunter knew the kill was fine. The group knew the kill was fine. But the ritual humiliation of the successful hunter served one specific purpose: to make sure success never turned into arrogance, to make sure no one started to believe they were too important to need the group. That's not cruelty. That's social engineering. Stage 2, direct criticism. If ridicule didn't land, the group moved to something harder. Multiple people. Clear words. Together. What you did wasn't right. This is how it affects us. This needs to stop. One person saying this can be dismissed. 5 people saying it calmly in front of everyone. That's a different thing entirely. Stage 3, shunning. If that still didn't work, the group withdrew, not dramatically, quietly. Conversations stopped including you. Decisions got made without asking you. The warmth that holds a group together pulled back, deliberately, visibly, consistently. And in a world where social belonging was the only thing standing between you and death, this was not a minor punishment. Being moved to the edge of a group's attention in the ancient world felt like what it actually was: a warning that you were close to being gone. Stage 4, removal. In the most extreme cases, behaviors that genuinely couldn't be corrected, that kept threatening the group's ability to function. The person was removed, sometimes exile. In rare, documented cases, collective killing. Bohm is careful about this. It wasn't common. It wasn't casual. But it was real, because in a world with no external authority, the group was the final line. And let me show you what this actually looked like in 3 real human communities. Because the patterns are fascinating, and they're all solving the same problem in completely different ways. The Kung San, Southern Africa. Anthropologist Richard Lee lived with the Kung San in the 1960s and 70s. What he found was a community that had built equality into everything. Sharing wasn't just a value. It was enforced through social pressure, so consistent it had become invisible to the people inside it. A hunter who kept too much didn't get punished by a leader. He got mocked, quietly excluded, talked about, until he changed. Lee documented one hunter who made a large kill, genuinely impressive, genuinely significant, and was met almost entirely with complaints and jokes about it. When Lee asked him how he felt about that, the man said something that stopped me when I read it. If a man says he's good at hunting, people won't want to live with him. He wasn't performing humility. He had fully internalized a social system so complete that the system had become his instinct. That's what culture does at its most effective. It doesn't tell you what to do. It makes you want to do it. The Semai, Malaysian rainforest. The Semai people of Malaysia developed a conflict resolution practice called betrayal. When two people had a dispute, the whole village gathered, not to judge, not to punish, not to find out who was right, to talk, for hours, sometimes days. Everyone who wanted to speak, spoke, and the goal, explicitly, openly, was not justice in the way we think of it. It was something the Semai called punik, a feeling, the feeling of peaceful coexistence. They weren't asking, who deserves to suffer? They were asking, how do we live together again? That question, that specific framing, produced something that formal justice systems often fail to produce. Not a verdict, a restoration. The Inuit Arctic communities. This one genuinely surprised me. Among certain Inuit communities, one of the primary tools for resolving serious disputes was the song duel. Two people with a conflict, instead of fighting, instead of going before any authority, performed in front of the whole community. Each person composed songs mocking the other, performed them publicly. The crowd reacted, laughed, responded, engaged, and at the end, the person who earned the better reaction was considered to have won, not necessarily the person who was actually wronged, the better performer. Now that sounds absurd by modern standards, but think about what was actually being measured. Could you express your grievance in a way the community could receive? Could you hold yourself together under pressure? Could you make people understand your side without losing them in the process? Those are not irrelevant skills in a community that has to keep functioning together. In fact, they might be exactly the right things to measure. When you look at all of this together, something becomes clear. These weren't random practices. They weren't primitive guesswork. They followed a single, consistent logic. The group survival matters more than any individual outcome. Every tool, the gossip, the ridicule, the 4 stages, the Semai betrayal, the Inuit song duel, all of them were built around the same core question. How do we stay together? Not who's right, not who deserves what. How do we stay together? And that's a genuinely different question than the one most modern conflict resolution asks. There's something else worth noticing here. None of these systems required a central authority. No king, no judge, no single person deciding outcomes. The system was distributed. Every person who participated in gossip was part of the mechanism. Every person who joined the ridicule, who showed up to the betrayal, who responded to the song duel, was enforcing the social order. Responsibility didn't sit at the top. It spread across everyone. And because of that, you couldn't corrupt it by corrupting one person. You couldn't break it by removing one leader. It lived in the group's shared behavior, and it reproduced itself through that behavior generation after generation. There's a word for that. Culture. Not art, not music, though those are part of it. Culture as the invisible operating system a group runs on. The set of norms and instincts so deeply embedded that people follow them before they decided to. These ancient groups built culture so effective at managing conflict that they held human communities together for hundreds of thousands of years, without a single law, court, prison, or institution of any kind. Sit with that for a second. So what happened? As groups grew, as villages became cities, cities became empires, the informal systems started to break. You can't use social pressure to regulate a million strangers. You can't rely on gossip when nobody knows each other's name. So formal systems took over. Laws, courts, prisons, authorities, and those systems solve real problems. Don't misread this. Formal justice is better at many things that small group dynamics were never built to handle. But something got left behind. The ancient systems weren't primarily about punishment. They were about restoration. The Semai weren't asking who deserves to suffer. They were asking, how do we live together again? That instinct, that need for something beyond a verdict, is still in us. You feel it when a conflict is technically resolved, but something still feels open. When the argument is over, but the relationship isn't right yet. When you got the apology and it still didn't close. Your brain is still asking the old question, the one that kept your ancestors alive. Can we be okay again? Ancient humans didn't resolve conflict because they were wiser than us, or more peaceful, or somehow better. They resolved it because they had no choice. The group was everything. And so they built systems, imperfect, sometimes brutal, often brilliant, to protect the only thing that kept them alive, each other. Every mechanism we looked at today was built on one truth. You cannot survive alone. That truth is older than language, older than fire, and it's still true